From start. See that left?
That little.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So thank you all for being here, and special thanks to the presenters. I'm very looking forward to yours, and then those were very good, and hopefully this ties in well. So what I'm going to give you today is actually not research. This is a proposal for research, given that I am in my first year of graduate school at the University of California at Riverside. So in my title is different, as this is a working paper. So we have Negotiating Sovereignty in Economics, a case study of the reverberating effects of genocide on the Nez Perce Indian Reservation between 1980 and 2000.
You said right now.
Okay. So, please excuse me while I have to read from my notes, because again, I've only been working on this for about a month. So, okay. So the purpose of this research explores how the Nez Perce tribe of Idaho has negotiated a history of genocide via political and economic relationships with the U.S. between 1980 and 2006. Now, political relations refer to issues of sovereignty raised by the Nez Perce tribe on and off the reservation, specifically matters concerning the rights of hunting, fishing, and passage. Economic relations refer to the dominant industries on the Nez Perce res, which include hunting, fishing, or logging and fishing, and then also Indian gaming or casinos. Now, critical race theory and settler colonial theory and racial formation theory are invaluable to our understanding of race and racism, especially for the importance of political economics. However, these theories pay only lip service to genocide of indigenous Americans, falling short of establishing a starting point of racial formations within the development of the world capitalist system over the last 500 years. So this research fills the gap by utilizing indigenous feminist theory, which provides an intersectional framework that allows for complexity and the ability to connect genocide, capitalism, race, gender, and settler colonialism to analyze its effects. So for settler colonial genocide in the Americas was racialized violence justified by a patriarchal God in order to gain control of land, resources, and labor. Now, this research employs archival analysis and secondary data analysis to expand our understanding of the use of genocide in the development of the political and economic relationships within global capitalism, how people understand these relationships, and the various manifestations of resistance. So again, I'm working with a number of different theories here. I'm a big fan of what David Garland terms theoretical pluralism, picking different parts of ones to complement the other. So again, critical race theory and settler colonial and racial formations have greatly expanded our understanding. But lip service, I'm sorry, it looks like I repeated myself. Okay, so you guys already got that. I'll move on. All right, now genocide on Turtle Island. Turtle Island is the phrase that many indigenous nations have used to describe their home. And if you look at a map of America, it actually kind of looks like a turtle. Now, this research proposes to explore the Nez Perce tribe of Idaho, how they have negotiated a history of genocide via political and economic relations between 1980 and 2006. So what do these relationships tell us about the reverberating effects of genocide and settler colonialism within the world economic system? Now, we have to understand that the U.S. conquered hundreds of indigenous nations through genocidal colonial expansion. Now, the particular results for each nation varied greatly depending on geography, military alliances, trade, and so on, to where some episodes may be best defined as war instead of genocide. Nevertheless, these wars were in the context of a sweeping genocidal project, so it doesn't necessarily matter if relations between the U.S. and a particular indigenous nation were genocidal, because the overall intent of the entire program was to move them out completely in order to take over the land. Now, the Nez Perce are an interesting case, as they were one of the few indigenous nations to put up a very strong fight that culminated in the War of 1877. In fact, the Battle of Whitebird, only 4 Nez Perce warriors were injured, and they killed 96 cavalry leaders. The cavalry was also led by O.O. Howard, and General Sherman was also in the background. Okay? Now, unfortunately, it wasn't enough, and the Nez Perce became confined to a reservation amounting to 5.8% of their ancestral territory. Now, prior to what we would call first contact with Lewis and Clark in 1805, the Nez Perce were economically and culturally influential in both trade and in war. Now, the Nez Perce, they were members of the Shapetan language family of the Colombian Plateau Indians, They were loosely connected hunter-gatherer bands of 50 to 600 people with over 100 permanent villages and a total population of between 10 to 12,000 people prior to Lewis and Clark. Today there are only 3,500 enrolled tribal members, and not all of them live on the reservation. Christian missions were established throughout the 19th century, as well as boarding schools in an attempt to kill the Indian and save the man, a common phrase of the time. Now, before the War of 1877, two treaties in 1855 and 1863, there's very particulars, but I can't get into it right now. They were drafted and signed. The second one actually was not signed by the majority of the tribe. In fact, it was boycotted by the traditionalists. It was only those who had been converted to Christianity that actually signed the 1863 treaty. And thus the government then had a justification to go on about its business. And of course, as we know, the government violated those treaties time after time. Now, with the Dawes Act of 1877, the Nez Perce lost even more control over their own reservation through land allotment. So what this meant is that the Nez Perce were able to purchase back small tracts of land for farming and grazing, but only if they had a Christian name. After all Christian Indians acquired their little plot, the rest was dubbed surplus and sold off to white settlers. As a result, the Nez Perce tribe today only owns 12% of the land inside the border of their own reservation. One way we can see the reverberating effects of genocide is with logging, the primary component of the economy, where most of the profits go to people and companies not associated with the Nez Perce, with most of the money traveling to Wall Street or Seattle. So how have the Nez Perce negotiated these relationships? Here is a brief map of the Shaktan language. And as you can see here, it was quite dominant, moving all the way up into Canada, even parts down here into Oregon. The Nez Perce, as you can see right here, their territory covered all the way out here into Montana, out to the Walla Wallas, and down into northeastern Oregon. Here you can see, here's ancestral territory in the gray. It's not very easy to see. The red is the Treaty of 1855. The smaller red one is the Treaty of 1863, and with the green is the land that they own today. Now, we have to understand that war is a social fact, and the type of warfare a society deploys is a reflection and a consequence of social organization. The U.S. deployed and endorsed genocidal warfare against the original peoples of America, and this history is significant, not only for our understanding of contemporary relations between indigenous nations in the U.S., but also the institutional logics of global capitalism, race, and gender. Genocide of indigenous peoples in the Americas evades much sociological inquiry, and this limits our theoretical understandings. Now, many studies from history and anthropology exist about the Nez Perce and their historical and contemporary experiences, but scant research explicitly connects those experiences with genocide. Even when studies do connect historical violence to what happens on the reservation, absent is the term genocide. Now, an important note is what matters most is the perspective of those who are the targets of war, and if they consider their historical experiences as genocidal or not, because the collective trauma is a social construction that requires cultural and political work. Furthermore, the ideas of what happened are just as important as what really did happen in shaping political and economic experiences. Now, many Nez Perce, and I know this through informal conversations, I actually grew up on this particular reservation, and they consider their historical experiences as surviving genocide. But we do not yet know how the process of negotiating collective trauma of genocide via political and economic relations. So, for example, in how this might play out, many Nez Perce consider exercising sovereignty, or their sovereign rights of fishing and hunting on their usual and accustomed territory, including land off the reservation, as an act of resistance to the near destruction of their people. In fact, the Nez Perce were able to take over all state-run salmon and steelhead fish hatcheries in Idaho in the late 90s as a direct result of exerting sovereign rights under the treaty in 1980s. Now, the Nez Perce also operate 2 casinos on the reservation, generating much-needed revenue, especially during fishing and hunting season. One of the casinos is in a town where I'm from with 1,100 people. How do you get revenue? With great hunting and fishing. But they also developed these under the guise of self-determination via economic development. All right, so genocide is an old and perennial political tool. A primary use, especially by elites of the colonizing powers to gain access to land, resources, and labor. However, it's important to recognize that whatever the role of elites in society, they always contend with the values, beliefs, and other forces of society. Hence, genocidal situations do not occur in a vacuum. To commit genocide, largely considered an ultimate crime by the international community, strong ideological justifications are required. So the act of genocide creates new ideology that justified the resultant development of new economic and political relations between the conqueror and the conquered. The cyclical cycle, ideology justifies genocide, genocide creates new justifying ideology, and new ideology justifies new relationships. It is necessarily reflected in institutions and daily interactions. Because, as C. Wright Mills reminds us, history is embedded in social organization and informs our beliefs, values, laws, institutions, institutional arrangements, and so on. Alright, so race and racism is often an ideological touchstone for genocidal relations, but this ideology does not appear on its own, it is a historical outcome. Now in the US, racial formations have occurred in 3 historical phases: the religious, the biological scientific, and the political. The periods for each phase are relative to the specific racialized group, and the phase does not have to end for another to begin. Furthermore, within each specific phase, the notion of progress is evident within each, if not explicit. Now, each one of these phases is important to understanding the reverberating effects of genocide against the Nez Perce because they were and are considered a specific racialized group. So in short, racism informed the ideologies that justified the genocide. Racism continued to inform ideologies born from the actual act of genocide, and thus embedded within present institutions and interactions are racist ideologies. Now, in the first religious phase of racialization, white settlers viewed indigenous peoples as, quote, heathens, savages, and animals that must be civilized through conversion to Christianity. Then, of course, white immigrants then killed, displaced, forced into slavery those who refused to become civilized because God demanded that they make progress with the newly bestowed land. The racialization project, of course, began in 1492, culminating in the 19th century in the form of Christian missions and Indian reservations. Indian boarding schools, sorry. Now, the idea and process of civilizing the savages is best known as manifest destiny. In terms of the biological scientific phase, they are a product of the industrial and scientific revolutions. Indigenous peoples and other people of color were considered primitive with lesser or inferior societies as compared to the ideological conceptions of Eurocentric ideas of what civilization should be. And this, of course, inspired military campaigns and forced sterilization programs on the reservation. Sterilization programs continued up until the 1980s in the United States. Okay, overall, 60,000 people that we know of have been forcibly sterilized by their own government, including in 2010 here in California, but you can look that up. So the political phase, really quick, it began in 1924 when Indians were finally granted citizenship. Now, of course, citizens have certain rights and privileges, but from an indigenous perspective, this was simply a legal tactic to legally purchase land from Indians because you can't actually buy land from an animal. Okay? Now, genocide in the world system. So informed by a history of racialization of indigenous groups, we can see genocide as a racialized project guided by very specific ideologies informed by notions of progress, civilization, white supremacy, and capital accumulation. However, genocide is also an economic project designed to appropriate land and pillage resources. So basically, world system theory sees that there is a core-periphery relationship where the core exploits the periphery, okay? And in this way, without giving you all the details, the Nez Perce Nation can be seen as a periphery within the core. It's also important to note that not all peripheries are created through genocide, but in this case, it is. Now, with indigenous feminism, okay, indigenous feminists make it clear that this view of genocide as racialized violence for the purpose of accumulating capital is incomplete because patriarchy and sexual violence are primary tools of genocide that intersect with racism and capitalism. So, for example, white colonial settlers often drew parallels between the biblical Canaanites and indigenous peoples. Both deserved eradication as both personified sexual sin. Now, the ideology of manifest destiny was justified using the words of a patriarchal God, combined different Christian ideas, most importantly Catholic discovery and Protestant predestination with military force. Now, this is quite evident in the boarding schools. We segregated boys from girls, taught them good Western gender roles as informed by God. Now, furthermore, consider the racist idea of Indians as animals. There's a sexist logic within this racism as animals are seen as dirty, and dirty Indian bodies of women are rapeable. because they are considered impure. Now, we have long recognized the use of rape in warfare, but we must consider sexual violence and patriarchy in the development of racist capitalist world economy and the reverberating effects of settler colonial genocide. Okay, apparently I'm done. I'm going to do historical analysis, that's all I was going to say.
You'll get lots of comments.
Right.
Okay, so now let's start. Do you know how to navigate this?
I hope so. I don't know.
I know.
I might break my leg here, so I'm not sure.
When close is. Yeah, okay, and is that yours? Go to, can you move up there? And I just need to take a nose count, so. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, and then the left arrow is. I think I'm going to do it from here because it's so tiny I can't really
As long
read
as it
it.
actually moves forward, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so my name is Karina Diaz. I will be talking about, I studied actually, my background is sociologist, but also clinical social work. So I started combining neuroscience with sociology, and I started finding like all kinds of interesting things. And now my area of interest is really U.S. veterans, and I have an interest in this population because my stepfather, he was a veteran from Vietnam, and I was noticing all these issues, and I said, well, I'm gonna go take a look. And what I found is that usually you have psychology taking over all of this work, and I said, wait a minute, sociologists need to do some work on this, right? So I will be talking about sociology of neuroscience, of which I started merging these two fields of study. And here I'm going to be talking about as a system of recovery for U.S. veterans. So to give you a little bit of a background, right? This is not what the research is about, but I want you to understand that after 9/11, this is what started happening, right? That we started deploying all these troops. And as a result of that, we had more and more veterans coming back, not only them being very, very young. So now you don't have the perceptions of the old veteran, right? The veterans, the person who looks very old. And in addition to that, right, they might have all these PTSD. So by the way, there's more sexual assault in the military than there is PTSD. But the stigma is that everyone has PTSD. And here is, I'm looking at the system of integration that we have in place, which is not very effective. So here's a little timeline as to what it is. So since 9/11, we know the terrorist attack happened. I don't need to go in detail because you know what happened after that, right? So 2 days after was when Bush declared the war. And then after that, we had two operations that went on. Operation Enduring Freedom and also Operation Iraqi Freedom. And from here, a lot of our service members were deployed. And even though now President since 2014, he said, well, we're ending this, right? And now it's supposedly fewer than 15,000 there, but service members there. But I don't believe this data. So now, another issue that's going on that I would like to talk about now with this. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate it. Send me my finger. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Okay, so it's important to understand, first of all, how the military cycle works. So you have in the cycle, you have 5 things that are happening, right? In order for us to be able to understand the whole military culture, we need to understand that there's a cycle on it, right? So pre-deployment, a lot of the times, the families will struggle to understand how everything is almost like when you're preparing to a trip, right? And you don't know what to expect and all of that. So the families go through all of that. And this is the time when they're prepared and they're ready to go into what goes next, which is redeployment state. And this is where they go into actual training. And some of the important things to notice, for example, with Navy, they actually have contracts with neuroscientists. And what they're doing is because you have cognitive processes that are the ones that help us to stay safe. And what does that mean? That means that if I'm fearful of doing something, right, I'm not going to be willing to go and put my life on the line if I know I'm going to die, right? In some way, I need to train my body to understand, kind of like become less afraid of dying in this case. So this contract is actually exploring, and some of the strategies have already been implemented, on which what they do is they have this hard training on which they try to have the military members go and their neurotransmitters are being rewired so that way they're less afraid to go into battle. So this training goes on. And what's happening now is I'm starting to make a connection to sociology, the process of resocialization that a lot of sociologists we better be aware of what's going on with that. So then after that, they get deployed, and then after that is all for the mission. Everything that you're gonna find is they disconnect pretty much from the rest of us, their family and everything that they know, to now go and do their service. They do their service, and during this time you have a sustainability, which means that the families are trying to make an effort to really have this connection with the veterans. And sometimes technology is not available, so there could be instances on which they actually go a lot of periods of time without getting in communication with their families, and this already starts creating making this connection even more intense. You also have then, after they go and serve, the post-deployment, and redeployment means that they're coming back now to reunite with their families. Yes. That's beginning. Okay, the purpose of this research study is to propose using sociology of neuroscience as a system of recovery for veterans. The research question now is, how can sociology of neuroscience help service members to integrate back into society? Some of the things that I found in the literature review is that we know veterans struggle with a lot of integration, and a lot of the problems that are happening is because it is the heavy emphasis on the mental health issue. But it's not as before the yes, there is a mental health issue, and as a clinical social worker, I understand that component, but there is a sociological aspect of it that's misunderstood. People are not really understanding the social impact. So if we're not able, if they went through the process of resocialization when they went and gave the service, now they have to be re-socialized to come back to us and be productive members of society. So there are a lot of issues with the roles as well, because when they come back, they don't know where they fit, if they fit in or not, right? They don't know where their place is. They have a lot of trouble with the families, because in the beginning, you may have a wife or the family members who took on the responsibilities that they used to do. So when they got deployed, all these family members took on their responsibilities. Now they're coming back. So integrating them back into the family and then having them go back to society, do their normal things, becomes very challenging for them, because it's all in the cognitive processes that are happening, that they are not understanding that. We need to understand both to be able to understand how we can support them to integrate successfully. Another problem, issues with the expectations, that usually, who is the timeless warrior, right? Is not a woman, first of all, right? It's a man, and a lot of the times, if I say the word timeless warrior, is a lot of the times many people have told me, I really picture this very masculine man, tall and very strong jawline and all of that, right? So, but the reality is that when they get deployed, they become a hero. When they come back, they become a problem to society, right? So it's a lot of going on with expectations, that they're expected to integrate to society, they're expected to do all these things, and they haven't even started to begin the process, the cognitive process of reintegrating. The social stigma, I touched a little bit in the beginning about that, which is really us thinking, well, they have PTSD, they have all these issues. A lot of them also, what I found in the literature, that they're really discriminated. They're prevented from employment as well, because everyone is under the impression that they have PTSD. Now, application of labels is really heavy also during this stage when they come back. The lack of support systems, because once again, the emphasis is really on the mental health. And we're not really looking as to how we sociologists can really help them out. our theoretical framework now, I'm looking at symbolic interaction theory. I'm looking at total institutions because if we remember total institutions is what really makes all this happen, right? The military is an institution with the purpose of resocializing civilians and having them go into the military culture. They will do anything for the mission when this is happening. They will die for whatever the mission is. So at this point, the total institution comes into place because the military they're very good at unplugging them from us and sending them, but not very good at having them come back to us and having us the support systems. Socialization is another problem because now we're looking at socialization at large scale. Not only these veterans, maybe some of them may have not gotten a proper or effective socialization since childhood. So now they go through this process of socialization, resocialization, and then it's too much, right? So when they come back, they already have problems of knowing how to integrate to society. So now the problem has escalated to the point that it becomes out of hand. High rates of suicide, for example, and a lot of them really becoming very violent. High problems with child abuse and also family violence as a whole. So now I'm also looking at resocialization. How is it that we can actually, as sociologists, build a bridge and help them get to the other side by combining these two sciences? The methodology, because this is preliminary research, so this is the first layer of my research study. I'm looking at existing data. There's plenty of data as to the mental health. There's plenty of data as to what the victims, how many people have died, and the problems that they have integrating back, and all the money that's being put not into sociologists to do research, but into psychologists and mental health providers because it's a mental health. But this is how this resocialization is being labeled as a mental health problem. And another thing, so historical documents, because I'm looking at the timelines, is Vietnam, because we know that a lot of our Vietnam is a whole set of issues with them. Because now what you're looking is at these veterans being out there, and not only that, they have their well-being has deteriorated so much to the point that there's no way to help them out. A lot of them will die on the streets as chronic homeless, as in the chronic homeless population. And I'm also looking at empirical work and sociology and also neurobiology. To discuss, sociologists can do more. We can do more to help these veterans. We can do more to help them make connections back to society. I'm looking also at the integration, the concept to help us to understand the process behind the military cycle, that there is a cycle and we need to understand it. There is a military culture, there's masculinity, there are all these other issues that we sociologists understand very well. Neurobiology provides details on cognitive processes because if we start with the cognitive and we follow by sociology, then we can make a great connection to come out with a good strategy to help them out. Sociology and neuroscience can work together to help them and solve the problem because it is a social problem. And the role of us as educators in community college, usually I teach at community college and I can see the veteran when they are in my classes because I have the clinical social work background. And a lot of them tell me after I'm done with chapter 5, which is our social interaction chapter, they tell me I have gone to therapists, I have done to do all these things. For the very first time I understand what is happening to me. I am not crazy. I'm just having trouble resocializing. And now for the very first time, they have a word that's not associated with mental health and they become very excited. So the veteran in the classroom is a great opportunity for us to help them transition back. So I'm looking into how the institution can help us out to make this happen. Limitations, this is preliminary research, there's a gap in the literature from sociologists. Not many sociologists are interested in looking combining two sciences and then doing this kind of work. So I'm calling actually all of us to get a little interested in doing this kind of work and the barriers that are out there with the institutions with this work. Recommendations for future research, now I'm looking to explore the resocialization process from the sociological perspective, identifying all those social barriers that can help us to had strategies to help them out to integrate back into society. Qualitative studies are greatly needed because in that case we can actually capture the veteran experience, but we can analyze it as sociologists, not as a mental health providers. And also investigating or identifying institutional and social supports that can help this population. In conclusion, sociologists can take charge of acknowledging how veterans lack that integration back into society and how this is a major social problem. Awareness about the lack of support veterans experience, conducting research that uses both sciences to understand the problem and also to solve it. And also advocacy, that we need to keep this in mind that we are also advocates, and also we need to do more social justice for this population that's very vulnerable. Thank you very much for having
Like 1 second left, she did it on the nose. I'm impressed this gel.
Very
Okay,
good.
so don't anybody leave. I gotta do a nose count because I gotta say how many people showed up. So I'm gonna do this again now.
Work makes the dream work. I was gonna offer to do that.
Thank you so much.
It's in the last place, and I need to fill out a form, but there isn't a blue. Check.
Yes.
Okay, you're a student. I just need to know how many hours you have. Can you join us at the front so I can, interrogate? Okay, so first of all, I think this was a wonderful set of presentations, and I want to hear our presenters if you can. I took copious notes, so I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Liam, the issue of militarization of police, you didn't get to that. This is one of those things that is one of my, I don't have enough data yet because I can't get at the data. And I was wondering, other than here, federal government's going to throw a lot of, surplus military gear at you guys. What about the folks coming in? And I'm going to ask Karina to maybe feed in with this too. I'm concerned about the fact that in the last, 20 years or so probably, job ads to hire people into the police force have changed from 2 years of the police academy or 2 years of college to, 2 years of military service is fine too. When the culture of the military and what we want for people policing are so different. And so do either of you have an idea of what we want to get at that information? Because I'd like to see, is it you're hiring more vets and you're not actually doing any background checks, and we're seeing an increase in the use of force. I had a near argument with some friends of mine over lunch about this, and one of them said, well, if they're not doing background checks, they're hiring guys who have PTSD, of course they're going to go off on civilians. And I want to know how much credence either or both of you would give them. So that's my first question.
Well, you're correct, of course. It is a serious, it is a serious issue. And Karina's presentation underpins the whole psychological issue there as well. I come from Ireland where the police don't carry guns. Now they can get them if they